And hello, everybody. I see we've already got some viewers, so hi. As you can see, as said on Sunday, I'm streaming live from NDC today with the beautiful backdrop. I don't know if you can see it in the corner, maybe not on this angle, but we have Westminster Abbey behind us, the Houses of Parliament just a few streets away, and yeah, a nice, impressive London building sitting behind me. Today, I'm going to be looking at the CSS on my site, and I cannot do CSS. So I have the awesome Amy sitting with me today to help me. Hello.
Hello, Stacey. Thanks for having me on the stream.
Thank you for offering to help.
You're welcome. Well, I always enjoy writing CSS, and this actually kind of brings back a couple of memories as well to my first NDC London when I did my first podcast here. So
awesome.
It's exciting in this room too. So it's exciting to be joining a live stream this time, and it's not even my first live stream. So a little bit excited to do it.
Yeah, it's. I'm really looking forward to this. I first saw you speak at Build Stuff in Lithuania.
Yes.
At the end of last year. I was lucky enough to be able to do hosting and speaking at that event. And the third day was just pure front-end accessibility awesomeness. I think you were the second talk of the day.
Yeah, something like that was earlier on, which was nice. So then I was able to relax after it. But yeah, it was really good to see. Particularly since having a bit of a break with conferences, it was nice to see how many front-end and accessibility talks they had going on at Build Stuff.
Yeah, so, and they made a big thing of it. They really had the beta room on the last day was the front end track.
Yeah.
It was themed. And lots of people coming into the talks throughout the day as well.
Yeah, it was really nice. There were some amazing talks going on. So yeah, well, I know you got to see all of them. So you got to see the really good talks.
And for your talk, I just remember sitting there and you were starting off a layout using CSS Grid from scratch.
Yes.
With some really interesting in-between stages, which if I was trying it myself, I would really be, what am I doing wrong here? And panicking, but seeing how it came together. And I just thought, I need to ask your help because what you did in a few lines of code took me weeks to get working on my site.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely, and particularly for a lot of people who they've learnt CSS but not had the opportunity to catch up with it. CSS has come in leaps and bounds in recent years. Even since I started doing front-end development, the changes that have come across has been incredible. So yeah, there are so many amazing things that we could do in just a couple of lines of code. So yeah, that's why I enjoy speaking about these things at conferences, because there are so many things that people who, when they've just not kept in touch with things, they go, yeah, well, I kind of know what CSS can do. And then I can give a presentation and go, oh, here's this thing and here's how to do it. And they go, oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
So it's so today we're going to be having a little bit of a play. Now it's going to be a little bit of a short stream. We're only going to be streaming for 60 minutes or so. So let's have a look at the code that we're going to be using. Let's see if I can remember how to use. Okay, that's kind of halfway there. I also want speakers in there. I normally have a Stream Deck, but I didn't bring the Stream Deck with me, so I'm kind of trying to find the right one. And you know what? I just can't. So I might just go without the camera for a second. Why is that not working? Oh, I know why that's not working. There we go. We have a camera in the corner again. Always fun. When you're working without your Stream Deck and you're just used to pressing a button and then you've got to remember what that links to inside of OBS.
Yeah, I don't fully miss doing streams.
So this is the website that I built, and this kind of came about with the talk that I was doing on building your own brand. And I brought the domain. I started playing with Azure, studied web apps, my resource of choice in Azure at the moment. But when I started it, I didn't want to just do something out of the box and simple. I wanted to learn as I was going along. One of the things I did to do that was delete Bootstrap, because everybody told me, CSS is really easy. Just use Bootstrap and it does it all for you. I thought, that's kind of missing the point. I'm not learning if I'm just letting a framework do it. I want to get the understanding. And then I can use a framework if I want, knowing what it's going to do. So after a lot of fighting, I managed to get the layout working as I wanted, get the header in the right position. Believe it or not, getting the headers and the buttons in the right position was 4 hours of work for me, swearing at CSS for not doing what I expected it to do.
Look, if it helps, I have spent many of my own hours swearing at CSS as well. Some of the finer points in getting things working, and particularly working with some spectacular designers who design things that aren't technically possible, but when it comes down to writing the CSS, it can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah. So it's we're going to see how we get this going. What are we going to be working on today? And then I'm going to come back to the chat and say hello. Is this page. So I have my blog post set up, and I am kind of proud of it for the knowledge that I've got. And the layout is pretty enough. It is responsive, so it goes down to a single one for a mobile view, and not on this resolution, but it does go out to like 3 when you get to a certain size screen. It's acceptable, but the CSS is also just a little bit more complex than I was hoping for. And I'm going to be honest, there's stuff in here that works. I don't know. So we're going to come back and see that. So we have Thindle in the chat. So hello, Thindle. And yeah, Westminster, it is just awesome in the middle of everything. I remember coming here for my talk last year. I was on in room 6, which is on the top floor. And you don't see it from the stage because there's a nice window wall to protect you from the crowds for the noise. But you walk out of the room in room 6, and you've just got this vista of London in front of you. It's unlike any other place I've spoken.
It's gorgeous. I remember my first NDC London back in 2019, and out in the main expo hall during the attendee party, because it was January and it was late in the evening, so it was dark, and all of the lights around Westminster Abbey had lit up, and I was looking out the window and it started snowing.
Oh.
And then this is London, so the snow kind of disappeared before it hit the ground.
Yeah.
But just looking out at this abbey lit up and the snow falling down, it was just.
Did you think it was Christmas again?
Well, from Australia, so snow and Christmas don't really go hand in hand.
No, you're in the middle of summer for Christmas, of course.
Different kind of thing, but yeah, it was just the most beautiful thing. So,
yeah.
And I do enjoy getting to come here and see the beautiful view. Yeah. I'm also enjoying all of the red buses that we can see.
Yeah, the red London buses.
Yes.
Yeah, I took my first tube trip yesterday.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say I don't know how Londoners deal with the tube in the summer, because it was 3 degrees and it was a sauna in that train.
So I think we lucked out. So it was like a little bit chilly, but it was very cold when we got in. So that was pretty good. But we also thankfully made it before it got too packed.
Yeah.
For me, it's always seeing the London Underground map, and every time the voice announced to mind the gap.
Yeah. Mind the gap.
Yes, mind the gap.
So we are really. Yeah, I just think really lucky to be speaking right in the heart where we are. And do I have some background noise suppression on? I do have a little bit. I'm using the Logitech software that comes with the microphone. I hope you can still hear us. In my ear, I can hear the noise from outside of the studio because the main expo hall is about 4 meters that way behind the glass wall.
And I think it's just about lunch.
And it's about lunch.
Yeah.
So there might be some noise coming in, and if there's not, then seriously awesome software that just comes out of the box. Okay, so seeing as we only have 50 minutes left, shall we get started?
Yep, we can get started.
So what I have, or the way that I set up my Blazor app in order to do this, because I use the same layout on 2 or 3 different pages, I have a component that contains all of my cards that I use for these multi-screens. Mm-hmm. And then I have the card itself. Both of them are just wrappers to put basically the same class on what I'm doing. My container card is fairly simple. It's setting it to flex.
Yep.
List style type none. That's one of the things that I needed to do, and I don't know what that does.
Yep.
Setting the margin and padding to 0 because otherwise it was just all weird.
Yep.
And then it's stretching the items. I think that just makes sure that they fill up the space on the row.
Yep.
Putting the wrap on so that it goes across and then down to the next one with the flex direction of row.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of understood most of it. I said that list style type none, that's one thing that I wasn't sure what I did that for.
Yeah.
But I know it didn't work without it.
So list style type none, that is one which we can have a look at what the code actually looks like in the browser in a second. So that's typically one that to me that says that you're using your blog posts are in a list. So you have probably an unordered list, so a UL element, and each of the cards are LI items. So which is often used for these kinds of things, which is typically the correct thing to do because for accessibility, that's great because people using screen readers get a list of all of these different items. So that's often what's done. Because we're not making it as a regular bulleted list, you set the list style type to none so that it doesn't have the dots.
Right.
That would also likely be where the margin and padding are coming from. But if we have a look at the web page in the browser and we can go through and inspect the elements, we can have a look to see if that is the case in the code.
We'll take a look at that one in a second.
Yeah.
And then for the card, there's a whole lot more code for the card. But also an amount of this comes from the fact that I really wanted it to be responsive. I started out just with 3 different, the standard widest view. And then I opened it on the phone and it was like, whoa! And then I started playing to see at what point I wanted it to come across. So the single one I use because I have in one place on my site, I display the card, but not in a list.
Okay.
So I just put that directly on the screen and I give it a class of single so that it just puts a size on it that works both on the phone and on a normal desktop.
Yeah.
Then I have the multiple, which is what I use for everything else. And by default, I just take 100% of the screen divided by 3 minus 20% because there's lots of different paddings in there. For the first child, I don't want margin because there's margin coming from somewhere else.
Yep.
And then the one that took me an age to get working properly is this line here, which is really awesome functionality. And the fact that you can take your flex objects and you can count what the object is and manipulate it just based on where it is.
Yeah.
And for that one, it's an amount of searching to find exactly the right format to use there, the 3n+1. So I have 3 across, and that means that the first one on the following row, again, I set that margin left to 0. And then I have 2 media queries down here, so that when it's between 901 pixels and 1500 pixels, that's when I go to that 2-column layout, and less than 900 pixels, I go to that 1-column layout. And they just do basically the same thing as before, only they set the width in a different way. So that's a code that I have inside of Visual Studio. If we go back then and have a look inside the browser, which, where are we? So if we do F12, and you want to have a look at one of the cards?
So if we just have a look at one of them. And what that looks like. Yeah, so that's a div. And if we scroll up a little bit to where the card container is, that is also a div. Okay, so I'm really interested in the fact that you needed the list type to get that to work.
I wonder if I started out as an UL and then I changed it
Possibly.
to divs. That could be it.
That's okay. We can keep working with it for now. So we can go through and have a look at the code that we've got there. So you're using Flexbox for this
Yep.
for now, which is really great. I'd actually kind of like to go through, and we can probably tweak the Flexbox code a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe remove a few things and keep it responsive before we move on to the grid, because Flexbox is still really great for this kind of thing. And the advantage is Flexbox has more browser support.
Right.
So we can go through grid a little bit later on, but it's really great to have the Flexbox stuff to start with, particularly because a lot of people already have Flexbox layouts, which it's really useful to use them. So we can go through the code that we've got for now. I also kind of want to, am I able to add links to the chat and everyone can see them?
Yeah, you should be able to do that.
Yeah.
That should come up.
Yeah. So your nth child bit that you took a while, there's a really great blog post on CSS tricks with nth child recipes. You were correct. Like the nth child selectors is so powerful, and so it's really useful to utilize them at times.
Yeah.
This has got a really great selection of like select only the fifth one, or all but the first five, or only the first five, or at certain patterns. And that's really cool to go through and select them. Highly recommend checking that out.
For some reason, that's not come into my chat. Is it a really complex link, or is it one that I should be able to type in?
It should be a complex link.
CSS
If you search for CSS tricks and child recipe, pretty much anything that you find on the CSS, there we go.
Yeah.
Pretty much anything you find on the CSS Tricks website, I highly recommend checking out. They're really amazing resources.
Yeah. Okay, I put that in the chat, so that should come to both YouTube and to Twitch.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so let's go through and have a look at the code.
Yeah. So if we come back to Visual Studio then.
Yeah. So one thing that I'd kind of like to start with, because you were really clear on wanting things to be responsive and accessible on mobile. So a really great way to make sure that this happens is, rather than starting at desktop and working down, starting at mobile and working up. So we're going to go through and assume that we're going through and writing the code from mobile up. So we can go through, and for now, we're going to go through and just write the code on Flex Object, and we're going to go through and remove the stuff that we've got on single and multiple. So if you remove the bits on those sections.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now on the Flex Object, we can set. So we've got a margin of 10 pixels.
Yep.
For now, we can probably leave most of it the same, and we're going to see how that looks. Where you've got there Flex Object First Child, we can go through and remove that, because we're going to use a little hack so that we don't have to go through and remove margins on specific items.
Okay.
We're going to make it so it's just completely responsive. So we can remove that one, and the Flex Object Nth Child. As fun as that is to use, we don't have to do it.
All right, so I can get rid of that one too.
You can get rid of that one, and we can actually probably get rid of the rest of the media queries. We'll go through and update them later on.
Deleting code is always fun.
Yes. Okay, let's have a quick look at the card container CSS as well. Yeah. All right. So let's remove list style type none, because we're pretty sure that that's not doing anything. We'll see if we need to add it back in again. Yeah. So flex wrap. Yeah, that, as the name suggests, will mean that if more than one item, if more items than can fit in the row, they'll wrap down onto the next row, which is what we want. And flex direction row, we can actually probably remove that line as well, because that's the default flex direction.
Right.
So if you wanted, we can remove that. That's the default. So that should be all good. And if we save that, have a look at how that looks.
Yeah. here as well. Okay, we've got functions running. Come on, give me a screen too. Always on the wrong window. Okay, and then we need to do this here. Starting. Right, let me bring that over to the other screen so you can see what I'm doing rather than me just typing away. So I'm using the static web app CLI here with a wonderful typo in there.
I've not used the CLI. I've done static web apps, but I've not used the CLI locally.
It's because I am accessing the API in order to get the blog posts. Because all of my blog posts are actually still hosted on dev.to. And I use their API to get the data in and then put it on my site.
Yes.
And of course, if you're using a static web app, then Azure deals with everything for you so that you just have one URL and everything works.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work locally.
Yeah.
So,
I think I normally just run my API as an Azure function separately. So I really should have a look at the CLI.
The CLI is really awesome for the way that it works. It came out before it went into general availability. It was purely to help you do this. Because before then, in order to connect everything up, you needed to do some boilerplate code. So it knew when it was running in Azure, it could just make the call to the same URL it's running on.
Yeah.
And if it's running locally, then it knew it had to go to a different port number and everything else.
Yeah.
So and this just replaced that for us.
I should really go through and check that out. Or I should really go to one of the static web apps talks.
There's a few static web app talks here. It's quite nice that we're getting an amount of talks on it now. So if we go to blog posts now, we have
a whole bunch of blog posts in a line.
Yeah.
If we go through and inspect the code, we can see that. And if we can, you can probably close the console as well.
That's not a bad idea.
To avoid that, and scroll up a little bit so we can see the container. And if you click on the container, the card container, so we can see, okay, so the reason why we wanted to remove the margins is so everything lines up nicely.
Yeah.
And so because we've put a margin around everything, we can see the card container lines up nicely with everything else. But if we then highlight over one of the cards, the margin's actually bringing it in.
Yeah.
So it's then, which is why we go through and remove the margins. However, there's a different hack that we can use, which is using negative margins. So if we go back to the code, and we want to look at the code for the card container this time.
Yeah.
Instead of setting margin to 0, we can set the margin to -10 pixels. Now, we want -10 pixels because the margin on the cards is 10 pixels. So we want it to match whatever their margin is, but negative. And if we save...
So if we... let's see whether or not the hot reload works. Hot reload for Blazor is one of those things. Sometimes it works and sometimes it really doesn't. And I'm going to say, looking at this, it's not really worked. Where are we? Card container.
I'm not loving the chances.
I'm on that one. Thankfully, you only have to start the static web app once. It's just that we now have to reload the site again.
Yeah.
I blame Blazor for this more than the static web app.
I've done JavaScript static web apps and I don't have that issue.
I think it's one of those wonderful things where when it works, it's awesome, and when it doesn't work, it's an absolute pain in the neck.
Yes. Okay, so now if we go through and have a look, our Flex container.
No, I need to go up. What's the content? Oh, helps if you click the right thing, doesn't it?
So a card container should now have a margin of -10 pixels. So if we hover or if we click on one of our Flex objects again, we can see, so the green is the padding, and so that's the edge of it, and that now lines up with our navigation items. So without having to go through and actually count the different items and remove margin left or margin right, it just lines up perfectly. So this is really great because we can remove a whole lot of that code making it
responsive. That's nice.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's go back to the code. we then want to go through and add adding the additional columns when they come along. Now, there's kind of two ways that we can do this. We can go through and similarly to what you had at various different screen sizes, we can then set at various screen sizes, we can set different sizes, which let's just go through and do it that way because it's a little bit easier. So underneath this, we'll create a new media query. So at media.
Screen only?
So we don't actually need screen only. So screen only means that this won't happen on print.
Right.
Which, if you are concerned about people printing out your web page, I recommend just doing a completely different print only style sheet.
Yeah.
So for the most part, we're good. And so then in rounded parentheses, yes, because we're starting at the bottom and working up, we want to use min width. So set min hyphen width. Now, this is another interesting one. So you can use any kind of CSS unit to define the minimum width of your media query. But it's actually really great practice to use responsive units because it's much better for accessibility. If we set pixels, that does it depending on a fixed screen size. But we're going to set it using ems, which is a relative font size. What that means is if somebody has zoomed their computer in really far so that they can read things, instead of it just being really big, it will actually default down to a mobile screen size. So if someone is someone is nearsighted or they have trouble reading small font sizes, when they zoom in, they'll get the mobile version, which will just stack on top of one another. So it's really great. So in this case, we're going to go through and set the min width to be 40em, so EM, which is the relative font size that you often use for media queries. And then after the rounded brackets, we add the curly braces, and inside of there, we're going to add some styles for .flex hyphen object. If we do curly braces, again, so same as up here. So same as up here.
Have I done that wrong?
Yeah. So we just want flex object space.
You know, I think that's kind of I have Copilot installed, and sometimes it just does interesting things, and sometimes I do interesting things.
Oh, my JavaScript types things randomly. Yeah. So on this case, we're going to tell it to be. We're going to have 2-column layout at this screen size. We'll double check on whether or not this is the right screen size because the font size, relative screen size, it differs depending on what the font size of your computer is. It's one of those ones where sometimes you have to ballpark it. So see whether or not it actually works and we can adjust that media query. So in this case, we want to have 2 columns. So we'll say flex object. So we'll set width to be 40%. Using percentage because that will be responsive. We're then going to go through and set this. So what will actually happen is the flex items, we can get them to grow and shrink to take up the extra space. The percentage just makes it a little bit easier to account for the margins without having to do all the math for the margins. We can let the browser do that itself. So let's set this and save and refresh.
Of course you ran into an unexpected problem. If it was an expected problem, that'd be weird. You really bookmark 40 to 80.
So then we can see this is now dropped down
Yeah.
to 2 columns. Now, if we go through and inspect again, and we're going to try and go into responsive mode. So if you click on the one next to inspect, so that will go into responsive screen mode. This is a really great way to test out the different sizes. So if we pull this out, there we go. So if you go back down a bit to just when it pops down into 2 columns, we go there. And what do we reckon? Is that a good size to be 2 columns? It was not too big beforehand.
Yeah. I think that's kind of okay. It's, I try not to put too much in the description, so that should be fine.
Yeah. So, and we can go through and adjust it later, but this is good for now. Okay. So the one problem with this is these are a little bit small. We do want them to grow out. We did the margin, so everything lines up nicely. So we want them to grow. So if we go back to the code, and we're going to use another flex property, which is flex grow, flex-grow. And we can set that to be 1. Now this, and we can chuck a link in to explain what this does. This allows you to grow items relative to one another. So if you set flex grow to 1 on one item and flex grow 2 to another one, the one with 2 is going to grow twice as big.
Yeah.
So this will take up additional space. So if we save and refresh, this should then mean our flex items.
I hate Visual Studio sometimes.
And there we go. Now they've grown out.
Yeah.
To be bigger. So we wanted on bigger screens for them to be 3 columns. So now we can go through and do this again for a bigger screen size. So we can send another media query for.
Can I copy this, or should I?
You can copy it.
Right.
Yeah, and then to set min width to be 60 ems. And we can remove flex grow because that's all sorted now. This time, if we want them to be a third, 25 pixels is probably a good option to put. Once again, they'll grow.
Yeah.
But 25 means we've got enough room for a bit of a margin.
Yeah.
So now if we save, and this is really great because you could continue going on and doing this. So if you go, well, actually a really big screen size, I want 4 columns, you can go through, and it's just a case of tweaking and making the percentage a little bit smaller until we get there.
Sorry, I just have to bring this in quickly. We wonderful one from Thindle there. Whoa, just got a heart attack when I noticed the time was 1400 here, but the meeting was pushed back to 1430. That means that you can stay with us until it's finished. You can see the end result.
So we go to blog posts, and there we go. We've got 3 columns. So, and that's pretty good. So we've managed to remove a fair chunk of the code, which is really awesome. If we go back to the homepage, though, I want to see if we can add one quick hack for the single post. And I'm going to see if we can add a couple of CSS trickery, so we don't even need the single class.
Okay.
See if we can get away with this. So if we go back to the code and scroll up to where we have the media query for 40 ems.
Yeah.
So inside of that media query, but after the flex object, we're going to add, so below the flex object styles, we're going to enter. So dot flex hyphen object. And we want a semicolon because we're using a pseudo selector. First hyphen child. So this is any flex object that is first FIR.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. First hyphen child. So this is similar to an nth child, but first child is the first child. And then semicolon, last child. Sorry. Colon. Dot, dot. Last child. So what this will do by chaining them together is it's going to get a flex object that is the first child and is also the last child, which means it's an only child. And on that, we're going to set width to be 100%.
Restart.
Restart. And so what this should hopefully do is on our single item, without even needing to worry about a single class, it should hopefully...
Ignore this one.
Yep.
Ignore this one. Oh, you know what? It really helps if you open it properly. That is my rather poor attempt at pre-rendering that I need to work on later on in the year. Should load from the... Way!
There we go. So there, it'll go all the way out to the full size of its container.
Yep.
Without having to worry about that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then I need to improve this one at some point. That's somewhere very deep in the index
probably
page.
just a case
I'll
of
deal
going
with that
through
one
and-
later.
Yeah. So we can go through and do that. So that's pretty cool, but we want to use CSS Grid.
Yeah.
So now the reason why we've kept this in Flexbox is because Flexbox has better browser support for CSS Grid. For the most part, it's not an issue unless you're having to support IE.
Right.
You're fine with Grid. However, it's still useful to practice using fallbacks for CSS Grid. So if we go to the code, and this time we're going to go to the container. So the difference there's a few differences between Flexbox and Grid. One of them is Grid, you more control on the container level, and Flexbox, you more control on the child level. So we're going to go through, and underneath all this code in the container, we'll still leave this as is, but after all of this code, we're going to use a supports query. So similar to a media query, but at supports. And then in rounded parentheses, we're going to check support for a property called grid-template-areas. And then colon, semicolon, dot. And then in a string, we're just going to put a full stop, which I can share a link later on, a little bit more information about this. And then add curly braces at the end, and we're going to put our code inside there. What this is checking is does the sports query checks, does the browser know what to do with this property and value?
Yep.
If it doesn't, it will ignore all of the code we put inside this query. Similar to how media query checks the size of the screen.
Yep.
This checks whether or not it knows what to do with it, which means Internet Explorer is going to ignore this altogether.
Yeah. Before we do that, I got a question from Sendel. Nth child 0 equals first child. Is that correct?
I would say no. Nth child 1 would be first child, because CSS is one of those ones to confuse people, because counting actually starts at 1, not 0.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I think nth child 0 would never end up working, I don't think.
Okay.
I can find out while we go through the rest of the code. Okay, so inside here, we're going to put code for the card container. So .card-container, and then it's like curly braces.
And I guess a display grid.
Yes. Yeah. Now, this code, if the browser knows what to do with Grid, this code is then going to override our Flexbox layout. Now, the one slight disadvantage of this is we do have to go through and overwrite some of the stuff we don't need.
Right.
Some of the stuff will be ignored because the properties are different, but some things like the margin, we don't need a negative margin anymore So we're going to
Okay.
use some grid magic. So we're going to set margin to be 0 because we don't need to worry about that.
And if you're doing 0, then you don't need to say what it is 0, right? You can just say 0.
Be 0. 0 is 0 in all of the units.
Okay.
So we can set that up. And because things are taking a while, I'm going to go through and write some of the card CSS first. And let's copy the supports query. Just copy this whole section here. Yeah. And we'll copy that over to the card CSS file. And all the way down the bottom, just remove the card container. But we can remove the full 26 to 29 can go. Yeah. If we scroll all the way up, we can probably just copy. So copy all of the flex hyphen object.
From the top?
Yep. So line 1 to line 6. And copy that in. And then we can have a look. Okay, so padding we can leave, so you can remove the padding. We don't need to reset that.
Right.
Background color, border radius, we don't need to remove. But once again, we want to set margin to be 0.
There we go.
There we go. And now we save and refresh.
And while that's building. So nth child is pure anarchy then. Gotcha. I'm guessing that's because that's not 0 base.
Yes. Well, to be fair, it does. 1 is clearly the first child.
Not on
but yeah, CSS does confuse people from other programming languages, particularly because we have things like, for us, bang important means important, whereas in most other programming languages, bang important means not important. I have a shirt that says bang important and I love to wear it and just start arguments.
So if we go to the blog posts now.
And there we go. They've all gone tiny again. So we're going to have to go through and write some grid columns in. So at the moment we've got a grid. There's just one column on the grid. So if we go to the container, we're going to go through and set grid hyphen template hyphen columns, which, as the name suggests, is we're going to write columns. Now, this is where we're going to use some CSS grid trickery. I'm going to skip past all of the beginner, these are the different things, and we can chuck a link in to the CSS tricks guide to grid, which explains a lot of the other stuff, and we're going to go straight to the magic stuff. So I'm going to set grid template columns to be repeat. And inside of here, I'm going to double check. I've got my.
It's always good having the cheat sheet.
Okay. So auto hyphen fill, comma, min max, and
as in min max.
As in min max. Rounded braces, parentheses. Whoops. Braces. Inside of the parentheses, let's set 1 FR. Actually, nope, not 1 FR. We're going to set 250 pixels.
So here we are using pixels.
Here we are using pixels, not AMs.
Right.
So the media queries are where AMs are super powerful because it means if somebody zooms in their screen, it pretends it's a smaller screen size. Then we're going to put comma and 1 FR. And if we want to save and refresh, and let's wait for it to do its thing, and we can talk through. So we're using 4 new different grid things. First is the repeat function. The repeat function allows us to repeat certain number of columns, certain size columns, certain number of times. Autofill tells it rather than, so repeat, we could say repeat 3 times. Autofill says to repeat as many times as you can fit in on the screen. So it does a whole lot of magic and fits in as many as it can. Min-max, as the name suggests, allows us to define a min size and a max size.
Yep.
We've set the minimum size to be 250 pixels. So the cards will always take up at least 250 pixels. We can adjust that if that's not big enough, but that's generally a good size, 250 pixels at least. 1FR then is a new unit for CSS Grid, which is a relative unit similar to Flex Grow.
Yep.
It takes up the remaining space and distributes it amongst all the things that are FR sizes. And relatively to, so 1FR and 2FR would be twice as big. So we can see here, we've got a whole bunch of columns.
Yep.
But they're really tiny because we set width at certain sizes, and it is actually then only taking up, so this screen size, I think we had 25%.
Yep.
So it's actually only taking up 25% of each column that it's got.
Okay.
So we do have to go through, and in the card CSS, so the card, for the flex, for the flex item. So we're then inside of the supports query, but below the flex object, we need to add, actually we can probably, if we scroll up and grab our 40M media query.
Yep.
Yep. And copy that down. And inside of that, we put dot flex hyphen object. Set width to be 100%. Sorry. So inside the curly braces. Objects.
What have I done wrong here? I've deleted something I shouldn't have deleted.
No, I think I moved.
Object.
Width 100%.
Restart again.
Yeah.
And then it can crash again.
Now, there's a whole lot of discussion about whether you embed a media query inside of a sports query or a sports query inside of a media query. For the most part, I'm pretty sure it doesn't make a huge difference what you do. But let's see. I could be wrong.
We'll find out in a second.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
And there we go. So now they've taken up 100% width, which is the columns. But we've lost all of our nice spacing between things. So if we go back to our container CSS and scroll down. So in here, so as well as setting the columns, we want to set a gap. So on the next line, so we add another line afterwards. And we're going to set grid hyphen gap.
What haven't I done here?
Maybe we're missing something. 10 pixels.
Yeah.
Let's set it to 10 pixels.
And that would just work for both columns and rows.
That will, so we can set them separately. There's grid column gap and grid row gap. But because this is a nice grid, we do want the gap to be the same. So we can use the shorthand grid gap 10 pixels. Yep. Yeah, that syntax highlighting, when the color is wrong, you can always tell.
Yep. I made a boo-boo somewhere.
I teach this in the beginner coding workshops I do. It's really important to understand the syntax highlighting, because if the colors seem wrong, if the colors are different than what you expect, something's broken.
Hey, awesome.
So we've got a gap.
That looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And then that is much less CSS and much more understandable CSS.
Yes.
Which is absolutely what I was hoping for.
And that's also still super responsive.
And it's still super responsive. There's one last thing that I want to change.
Yes.
There's one thing I noticed that's different. I'm missing this alignment now. So there should be a 10 pixel gap on this side of it.
Oh, okay.
Have I just made life really hard for you?
I think I might know. So if we go through and inspect, and inspect the container, card container. If we can go to computed, the computed tab, scroll down. No. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to check to see whether everything lines up. So if we hover over card container and then hover over dynamic content. Okay, so that seems to line up with the edges. Hover over content. Hover over main panel. If we scroll up, somewhere here, hover over page. Yeah, okay, so if we hover over navigation wrap, because that's sitting where it should. Hover over header wrapper. Okay, so if you click on header wrapper, let's see what's, if we go to styles there. So we're actually using the margin to keep that. So if we go down to click on card container, and because we're having fun. Oh, but this is mostly okay. So we're actually not going to mess with card container because it's the rest of the content that we're having issues with. So if you go back to main panel, and click on main panel, there we go. Looks like we've only got a margin on the left and not on the right. So where is the main panel styles? Yeah.
It's my solution explorer. That would be. I wonder if that's just pure in my www root CSS.
Here we go. Main panel, margin left 15 pixels. So put margin right in pixels as well.
Now, this is a really good one. This is a really nice example of why it's useful to actually speak to somebody who knows what they're talking about as well, because I would not have done this in the right way at all.
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and it's more just about getting used to. Like, I highly recommend just clicking around in like the inspect tab, and just clicking around, having a look, going, okay, well, this is what this looks like. This looks the way I want it to.
Why is that no longer working?
We got errors in the terminal.
No, that one should be working. Did I type it right? Sent an invalid response. We're getting no errors. So what do we get if we do a... Well, that's just odd. Well, we know that 5,000 is working, so let's just assume that the SWA has just decided to die on this and try again. Okay, I have apparently typed localhost wrong. How can you mistype localhost in a way that you don't read it?
I'm not too sure.
Okay.
That was fun.
That looks better.
There we go.
Awesome.
So that lines up. Yeah. So there's just clicking around, having a look, going, okay, well, this element looks the way it should. What am I missing from this other element? So going through and having a look in those, inspecting things, hovering over where you can see the overlays of the margin and the padding and the content is super useful as well.
Yeah.
And even just clicking around in the inspect element, and I'll often go through and just in that panel start to add background colors to elements so that I can see what's sitting where.
Yeah, I think I did that when I wrote this one originally. Most of it was written in the dev tools, and then I tried to take that out and figure out where I needed to put it in the code.
Yeah, so if you're ever doing a lot of code, I've absolutely, for things that didn't have the hot module reloading and it just took forever to reload the page, I've done a lot of coding directly in there. If you're doing that, I highly recommend trying Firefox.
Yeah.
Because Firefox will literally give you it'll spit out, these are all of the changes that have happened to the styles. And so it'll just literally spit out all of the codes of what you've deleted, what you've changed, what you've added. So you can just copy that entire thing, chuck it in CSS.
I am going to be trying that one.
Yeah. So for
get back into Firefox.
For front-end code, Firefox is really great, particularly for playing around with CSS Grid. Their grid inspector tools are really good. Chromium has it now, but Firefox's tools are just really great for a lot of stuff. So I'm regularly switching between Edge and Firefox. Firefox has just got some spectacular front-end tools.
I'm going to be taking a look at that one then. Yeah. And well, we're just about out of time, so a couple of last comments from Tim. Yep. So we have I like that I'm not the only one feeling lost. Do you mean the fact that I was just really doing stuff not necessarily in the best way when I was writing this? And you want some animations? Add some animations to this and my brain will melt. Where do you want the animations? Let's have a chat about that, but next time I stream. Because we are just about out of time.
Yes.
That is stunning what we've done in 1 hour. Thank you so much for that.
No worries.
And thank you for joining me. This has been a lot of fun. And wow, this is going to be live on my website at some point this afternoon when I push it up. I'm super happy.
Well, that's really exciting. Yeah, I love playing around with these kinds of things. It's been fun to do it. Plus, it's really interesting as well because I'm in the front end code so often. It's nice to speak to people who aren't because that kind of reinforces the content that I do. Like I'm working on a bunch of new talks at the moment, trying to work out what people want. One of them is on animation, so I know that's a good one now because people are asking the questions. So maybe once I've got that done, I can come back and we can do animation.
That would be cool to have you back again and look at animations. So, well, thank you again. It has been great from streaming here from London. And, well, next week back to the standard time, which I will organize at some point. I say standard time. Every one of my streams has been at a different time so far. I will get some kind of consistency at some point. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have an awesome rest of your day. And, yeah, bye-bye for now.